In the previous part, we saw that carbon dioxide is not a fixed component of the atmosphere. It moves continuously through the Earth system. Between air, oceans, and life, carbon is constantly exchanged, absorbed, released, and recycled. But this is only part of the story. Because not all carbon keeps moving. Some of it leaves the active system. And when it does, it can remain out of circulation for thousands or even millions of years. This introduces a different dimension to the carbon cycle. Not just movement, but storage. As we saw in Part 7, carbon is the backbone of all life on Earth, and the primary way carbon enters the biosphere is through carbon dioxide. Yet today, carbon dioxide concentration is only about 420 ppm, roughly 0.04% of the atmosphere. It has not always been this low. If we take a look at carbon dioxide concentrations over millions of years, something striking emerges. Recent syntheses of proxy data, together with long-term carbon cycle models, suggest that for most of Earth's history, carbon dioxide levels were significantly higher than they are today. Over geological timescales, carbon was abundant. In comparison, it is relatively scarce in the atmosphere today. If carbon is so essential for life, a deeper question arises. Where did the carbon go? It could not have simply disappeared. To understand this, we need to distinguish between two very different types of processes. As we saw in Part 7 and 8, some carbon moves quickly. Plants absorb carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. Animals release it through respiration. Oceans continuously exchange it with the atmosphere. This is the fast carbon cycle. It operates on timescales from days to years, and it defines how the system responds to short-term changes. But there is also a much slower process. Carbon can be stored in soils, in sediments, in the deep ocean. And over long periods, it can become part of something far more stable: rock. This is the slow carbon cycle. And unlike the fast cycle, it does not simply redistribute carbon. It removes it from the active system for very long periods of time. One way this happens is through the formation of fossil carbon. Over millions of years, organic matter can be buried in sediments and gradually transformed into coal, oil, and natural gas. This process begins when plants and microorganisms fix carbon dioxide through photosynthesis and store it in organic matter. Under certain conditions, especially where oxygen is limited, this organic material does not fully decompose. Instead, it becomes buried. As layers of sediment accumulate above it, pressure and temperature increase. Over long periods of time, this buried carbon is chemically transformed. Soft organic material becomes peat, then coal. In marine environments, microscopic organisms can give rise to oil and natural gas. This carbon was once part of the active biosphere. It was taken from the atmosphere, incorporated into living systems, and eventually removed from circulation. In this form, it is effectively isolated from the atmosphere for millions of years. Today, we are reversing part of this process. By extracting and burning fossil fuels, we are returning this long-stored carbon back into the atmosphere, on timescales that are extremely short compared to how it was formed. While this pathway is important, it is not the dominant mechanism over the longest geological timescales. There is another process, more pervasive, more continuous, and far more significant. A large portion of Earth's carbon is locked away through the formation of carbonates. In the oceans, many organisms, from shellfish to microscopic plankton such as benthic foraminifera, build their shells and skeletons from calcium carbonate. This process begins with carbon dioxide dissolved in seawater. Carbon dioxide reacts with water to form carbonic acid, which then dissociates into bicarbonate and carbonate ions. Marine organisms use these dissolved forms of carbon, together with calcium, to construct solid mineral structures. Over time, these organisms fix carbon from the ocean and convert it into stable mineral form. When they die, their shells sink to the seafloor. Layer by layer, these remains accumulate, forming sediments that are gradually compacted and lithified into rock, most commonly limestone. Under certain chemical conditions, some of this material can further transform into dolomite, a related carbonate mineral. These processes take place over vast timescales, but they operate continuously. Over millions of years, these deposits grow to enormous scales. Entire mountain ranges, such as large parts of the Alps or the Himalayas, are composed of rocks that originated as marine carbonates. In this form, carbon is no longer part of the active cycle between the atmosphere, oceans, and biosphere. Estimates suggest that the overwhelming majority of Earth's carbon, on the order of more than 99%, is stored in the solid Earth, primarily in carbonate rocks. Once locked away, this carbon can remain sequestered for millions, even tens to hundreds of millions of years. This makes carbonate formation one of the most important long-term controls on atmospheric carbon dioxide. The fast carbon cycle is balanced. Carbon dioxide is absorbed by plants and released by animals and decay. Some of it is also absorbed by oceans if climate cools and released when temperature rises. In contrast, the slow carbon cycle introduces an important asymmetry. Carbon moves relatively easily into storage, but it does not return as easily. The release of carbon from rocks requires tectonic activity, volcanic processes, or long-term weathering cycles. These processes are slow, much slower than the rate at which carbon can be incorporated into sediments and carbonates. As a result, there is a long-term tendency in the system, a gradual transfer of carbon from the atmosphere and biosphere into the solid Earth. This has a profound implication. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is not only shaped by short-term exchanges, it is also influenced by how much carbon has been removed from circulation over geological time. In other words, the baseline itself can change. Over very long timescales, this process can contribute to a gradual decline in atmospheric carbon dioxide, potentially placing constraints on biological productivity and ecosystem stability. It is not caused by a single event, but a persistent imbalance between removal and return. This perspective changes how we think about the carbon cycle. It is not just a system of flows. It is also a system of accumulation and depletion. Carbon is not only exchanged. It is also gradually redistributed into reservoirs that are effectively inaccessible on human timescales. This means that the amount of carbon available in the active system is not fixed. It can increase, but mostly it declines. In this sense, the carbon cycle has a kind of memory. Past processes continue to shape present conditions. Carbon that was removed millions of years ago still affects the system today. It influences how much carbon dioxide remains in the atmosphere, and therefore how the climate system operates. So far, we have looked at how carbon moves, and how some of it is stored. But this leads to a deeper question. What happens when too much carbon is removed from the active system? What happens when the available carbon becomes limited? Because carbon dioxide is not just a component of the atmosphere. It is the entry point of carbon into the biosphere. It is the foundation of photosynthesis, and ultimately of life itself. If carbon dioxide levels decline over long timescales, what does that mean for ecosystems? For vegetation? For the stability of the climate system? In the next part, we will explore these questions. We will look at how changes in carbon availability may influence biological systems, and what that could mean for the history of life on Earth. In the next part, we will try to answer how changes of carbon dioxide concentration affect the biosphere and, ultimately, the changes of climate. While strictly remaining within the boundaries of widely accepted science, we are going to explore the crucial role of carbon dioxide in the interactions of climate change, vegetation, and life itself. If you liked this part, don't forget to share the video so others may also enjoy it. Also, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part and other exciting videos released in the future.